Hello there, it's me, Tom. A little bit of bad news before we get into this week's episode. Reese and I got to record this podcast in person today for the first time in a very long time, and we talked about lots of great stuff, which you will hear shortly. Unfortunately, when we came to check the recording after, this is what it sounded like. Hello and welcome back to the Rearview Podcast. Now, at this point, with not enough time to re-record the entire thing, we very easily could have made the decision to bin the whole episode and put a tweet out blaming technical difficulties. However, Reese and I discussed it and we made the decision to bring you this episode regardless. Unfortunately, having to use our camera audio instead of our studio microphones, which, admittedly not ideal, is our best option. I hope you can enjoy it regardless because there is some great content in there and it's much better than what the alternative audio would have sounded like. So without further ado, I bring you our French Grand Prix roundup. Hello and welcome back to the Rearview Podcast, and before I explain any of this, I would like to start today's episode with an apology. An apology to my good mate Paul, who I call boring and mocked for his tendency to be slow and unexhilarating.
You've been slagging him off, haven't you?
I've been absolutely horrible to him because Mr. Paul Ricard, I do hope you can forgive me because blimey, we actually had a good French Grand Prix and I can't quite believe it.
Yep.
Anyway, more on that to come. Of course, this is the Rearview Podcast. My name is Tom Lomas and for the first time in a long time, I'm joined in real life today by the wonderful Mr. Reese Keeper. Look, I can touch him. Probably shouldn't COVID, but I can.
You can if you want
Reese,
to.
how are you?
Yeah, I'm alright. I went to the hairdressers this week and asked them for an undercut because that seems like what's working very well recently. Woo! And we're on the ball.
Reese
that was a good one.
It was alright. It was alright.
I thought of that in the shower.
Paul Ricard then. What do we make of it now? For so long, it's had this tendency to be a boring, uneventful race, usually with a classic procession down the midfield and not much else. But this year, it certainly made things a bit more exciting. What did you think of that race, Reese?
So I'm not going to lie to you, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to say that I haven't watched it. I'd be a pretty bad podcast host if that was the case. I was very, very tired for it. Right. So I was working nights. Mm-hmm. Didn't finish work till about 3 o'clock in the morning. Then got up at 9 o'clock. Mm-hmm. So I was fading in and out a little bit, let's just say that. But from what I could gather, it was an exciting race. It was an exciting race. And what's up? You got the start? Yeah, I got the start.
You got the start. So let's start at the start then, because it was Verstappen who led into the first corner, quickly followed by Hamilton who led into the second corner. That was the race's first huge curveball, with Max making that mistake, and that mistake really then spelt out the first leg of that race. What did you make of that mistake? Verstappen just going a little bit deep into the second corner.
You don't often see that, do you? Like we always say that you don't often see it from Max and Lewis, like little mistakes, and it was a little bit of a big mistake. He's lucky that he didn't lose more places from it, to be honest. So un-Max-like, if you will.
Yeah.
But you could show it just showed how much he was pushing to keep the Mercedes behind him.
Yeah, definitely. It was an interesting one, and I think ultimately it wasn't Max's mistake. The wind was very strong, and I don't think he quite anticipated the winds he'd be facing as he came into that first corner. I think that's what mainly caused him to lose the back end. But to be fair to him, it could have been a lot worse. He held it. He only went behind Hamilton. Bottas stayed in front, behind him even. And really, that's kind of how it led. As I said, for the first leg of that race, it was Hamilton from Verstappen up into the pit stops. And Lewis had built himself a good lead over Verstappen when Red Bull decided, and like you say, they tried the undercut, and the undercut at Paul Ricard apparently was very powerful because they played an absolute blinder. And I don't know if you're awake for this bit, Reese.
I was just fading. Okay.
It cut to the wide shot of Hamilton coming out of the pit lane from his pit stop, Max on his outlap still from his lap, and it was literally wheel to wheel racing, and ultimately Max came out on top. And in fact, we saw a few examples of the undercut being extremely strong at Paul Ricard. What was your feeling when you saw that?
Yeah, Danny Ricks worked really well. Danny Ricciardo's undercut. Because when we initially brought him in, I'm a McLaren fan, but when we initially brought him in, I was thinking, that's early. Yeah, you couldn't tell. When we initially brought him in, I was like, that's early. That's too early. I'm not liking this at all. But no, and it it just made it gave the race a little bit more excitement that we normally don't have at France.
Well, Riccardo was in a race with Leclerc, was it, at that point? And they brought him in. They said to him, "Come in, we'll undercut Leclerc."
Yeah, he was ninth and 8th or something like that, like quite far down. So it gave the race a bit more excitement than we didn't expect, and also the fact that the tyre, big word that I can't say, begins with a D.
Duration.
Deterioration.
Deterioration.
We'll go with deterioration.
Okay, that's a word.
That wasn't the word that they used though. But the fact that the tyres...
the life of the tyres.
The life of the tyres, sounds like a film, wasn't holding up as well as teams expected. Because going into the race, you had Crofty going, it's got to be a one-stopper.
Yeah,
we're going to go from hards to mediums.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, cars are flying in on lap 8. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, this is it. So we'll come to that.
Sorry, I just jumped ahead.
I'll put a little disclaimer in the podcast here. If you hear some weird dog sounding noises...
We got a podcast dog.
Got a podcast dog.
Milo's.
Little Milo.
Hello. Milo. Hey, Milo.
People not watching on YouTube right now are very confused.
He just looks upset that we woke him up.
There's dog pictures.
Go
onto YouTube, you can look at a dog, it's quite cute.
He's an old man.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Anyway, yes, it was around the end of that first stint of pit stops that people who had previously predicted a one-stop race started saying, actually, this might be a two-stop. And suddenly, personally, I started getting flashbacks to Spain earlier in the season, where obviously it was Mercedes. That was meant to be a one-stop race. Then Mercedes and Red Bull both pit onto the next set of tyres. Red Bull were winning, and then Mercedes pulled a blinder there, decided to pull Hamilton in, put on some medium tyres and go to the end on another set, and he won the race ultimately. I was getting flashbacks to that here, and I thought, Mercedes pit strategy allowed them to win the race there, and, subsequently this is what happened here. After just 12 laps or so on the hard tyre, Max came in, put on the mediums, and I was left thinking, will Mercedes jump here? Will they come in too? Because that would be the big question. I think we knew how powerful the undercut was around Paul Ricard, and Red Bull used that to their advantage, saying, we're going to take a risk, we're going to pull the trigger here, we're going to bring Max in off the hard tyres, we're going to put him onto those medium tyres. If you can't close that gap, we've thrown away what could be a good win. If you can close that gap, it'll be an absolutely dominant sort of masterclass, and ultimately he did. Mercedes didn't come in. They left Hamilton out and very quickly lost their gap to Verstappen to do a pit stop. Within a few laps, if they'd have pitted, Verstappen would have been clear at the front. And this is what it all came down to, really. It all unravelled from there. What did you think watching that in the race?
You got to say that the Mercedes strategists had an off day. Because you could guarantee any other race, they're living rent-free in Red Bull's head. Whatever Red Bull are thinking, Mercedes do it first. Whatever, Red Bull want to do, Mercedes are there first. Mercedes are always knocking on the door thinking, being like, look, we're going to challenge you on this, we're going to challenge you on this, we're going to get you on this. And that's what's won them the World Championships.
Yeah.
As well as having a dominant car, obviously. You've got to have your strategists. They were next level strategists. McLaren this weekend showed that their strategists were on one. Like they were doing nutty stuff. I think it was the radio messages at the end. Are we going to get onto that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll go into that a little bit later on. But I think it was interesting. Well, one of the drivers said, sorry, my voice has just gone on me. Talk amongst yourselves.
I think we can go on to that now. Actually, I think those radio messages show both drivers. In fact, said at the end of the race, this should have been a two-stop. Why didn't we two-stop it? Bottas said, I told you right at the start of this race, after a very short stint on the medium tyres, this is going to be a two-stop race. They didn't.
Yep. And I think I think you just put that nicely for what Bottas actually said. And Bottas has got to be, for an experienced driver like Valtteri Bottas, who is absolutely incredible in F1. Like, you can't take anything away from him. To be successful in F1, he's not won a World Championship, but he is one of the most successful drivers on the grid.
To be a Formula 1 driver, you need to be a good driver full stop. You don't get there not being a good driver.
Yeah,
and you have a feel for your tyres.
Yeah, and he's got the experience in a car. It doesn't matter what the strategists say. If the driver's not happy with the car, they're gonna come in. Yeah. It's like if you were to go around and get a puncture, and then the strategist would be like, "Hang on, you got that puncture on lap 6, but we're not coming into lap 23."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's the equivalent of what happened.
It's and then there was also the moment earlier on in the race where they messed up Hamilton's pit stop. They didn't react to the undercut well enough. Bottas similarly. You do feel like Mercedes have missed a trick at this race.
Yeah.
Which is,
they dropped the ball.
Alternatively, you can say that the same thing happened in Spain with Red Bull, and obviously there's plenty of comparisons between this race and Spain, because there are many of these similarities that flipped to the other team. Red Bull did this in Spain, Mercedes did this in France. They both messed up in their own ways. I think differently though, there was a part of me that towards the end of that race thought maybe Mercedes could come back and do what Red Bull couldn't. Maybe they could still win this race, missing the undercut and missing that second pit stop. Could they still pull it off? Because with 5 laps to go in that race, it was still very close. Hamilton, with 5 laps to go, was meeting Verstappen's pace. He was keeping up with him, he was keeping that gap, but then from there it just very quickly fell off. He couldn't keep pushing on those whole tyres, and ultimately on the penultimate lap, Max just flew past him with very little challenge. But it was great to see. Max hunting Lewis, flying through the pack, back to catch up with him. I think he went down to P4 after his pit stop, had to pass Bottas, had to pass Perez, and then ultimately Hamilton to get back up there. And that was the most exciting part of the race, and that's what really made the race, in my opinion, was that gamble that Red Bull took to go to the back of the pack and then come back through, flying through the pack to catch up to him. It made that race exciting, in my opinion.
I mean, I'm not going to lie, I didn't think he was going to catch him.
No.
I really didn't think he was going to catch him.
It got very nip and tuck.
It did, and that is the closest end to an F1 race that I think we've seen in a while. I thoroughly enjoyed it though, and I just want it to keep happening like that.
Hopefully so. And I mean, I've said it before and I'll say it again. What we have this season is something we haven't had for the last 8 years or so probably, which is an intra-team championship rivalry. Genuinely 2 different drivers from 2 different teams, week in, week out, throwing punches, throwing blows, taking blows to that championship title. And it really is exciting because it's spicing up even the most mundane of races. And I know I said at the start the whole apology to Paul and saying that he did actually make an exciting race, but honestly, I don't think France has changed that much from when we last raced here in 2019. But what has changed significantly is the field of cars competing, and that closeness and competition is really going to make this season a memorable one, because it's making these races like France, which traditionally have been boring races, a lot more exciting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The fact that the title is still up in the air, it's such a nice feeling being an F1 fan, knowing that Max or Lewis could win it. I think it is obviously between them two, but it makes it so exciting. Also, I want to give a quick honourable mention to Perez, because we run about Max cutting back through the top 3. I don't know if you've seen it. F1 put it out on the team radio. The engineer was very much in Perez's ear, being like, Max is 3.1 behind you, Max is 2.8 behind you.
Yeah.
And then Perez made sure. Perez was basically driving on the bloody gravel to get out of the way, even though there's no gravel up the car. But he was basically off the track to make sure he was out of the way so much for Vettel to come through. And
Verstappen,
sorry. And Verstappen, repaid, Verstappen got on his radio, he was like, tell him I said thank you. Sort of thing. And then Perez was like, let's go get him.
Yeah, I saw that, and I think that shows what Red Bull have this year, that the Mercedes have kind of had in the past with Bottas and Hamilton, but you never feel like Bottas was always the wingman. He doesn't want to be that anymore, and that's clear. That's what's sort of going wrong at Mercedes, I think, this year. Bottas isn't as willing to play into Hamilton's hands as maybe Perez now is to Verstappen. I think Perez...
He said at the start of the season, didn't he, that he was going to be selfish.
Exactly, yeah. And we've already seen examples of that when, I think it might have even been Spain, where Bottas was coming through and they said to Bottas on the radio, let Hamilton through, he's on a much better strategy, and Bottas didn't let him through. He made him race to get that position, and on the flip side, Perez does, and there is Perez doing that. I don't think it's him showing he's a rollover second driver. I think it shows that Perez knows teamwork. He knows that probably on the flip side of that, if Perez is going faster and Max was there, I think they do the same thing the other way around. Yeah. It's good teamwork, and it shows that the team are prepared to say, look, that's the fastest driver, let them go. Or Reese's punched his microphone. He's absolutely raging.
I'm sick of my hair, so for any viewers, I do apologise about it.
But yeah, it just shows that I think Perez is the driver Red Bull have needed for a while. He's taken a while to get into that seat, but I think he's comfortable in it now, and he's consistently getting points. He's consistently up there with the top 4 fighting in that top four, and he's beating Bottas pound for pound in that championship at the moment, and that's where he needs to be.
I think there is literally no argument between Perez and Albon for that seat anymore.
Yeah.
Perez has managed, he said, judge me in 6 races.
Yeah.
The 6th race he won, didn't he?
Yeah.
And then it adds this extra little bit of excitement knowing, oh, well, if Mercedes do that with one car, Red Bull can do it with the other car, blah-de-blah-de-blah.
Yeah,
like, you know what I mean? You've got 4 cars now up there that are very much battling for race wins.
And I mean, don't get me wrong, I think Albon's a great driver still, and he's been racing DTM this week, and he did very well. I think he got on the podium in DTM. He is a good driver, and you can't take that away from him. When he was at Toro Rosso, he really impressed. His first few races at Red Bull, he really impressed. And I do think if he'd have had the time, he could have developed into a good driver. But the problem is Red Bull at the moment, in the position they are, don't have time to give to their drivers. They need someone to come in like Perez, who's got the experience, got the knowledge, that can sit in that car within 5 races, be challenging.
Don't get me wrong, Albon's a good driver.
Yeah.
Gasly's a good driver. They've both been proving it.
Gasly especially, recently in AlphaTauri.
Oh, 100%. However, for them to succeed, for the younger drivers to succeed in the Red Bull development program, they need to leave the Red Bull development program because, like it was Daniel Ricciardo and Max Verstappen, the young gun and the older one, that's what they need to. That's what they need to replicate really with Max in the car, because Max is always going to be their first choice driver, their go-to man, and rightfully so. Max has proven that he should be the top of the team sheet, if you will.
Yeah.
First name on it. However, I just think that Red Bull have done a good job by getting in the experience. Like, it was rumoured that Sebastian Vettel, I don't know what's happening with me names today, Tom. It was rumoured that Sebastian Vettel was going to go back.
Yeah.
And everyone was a bit like, what? Well, then that would have been a good move, because he's that older, experienced driver again.
Well, I mean, we spoke about this on last week's episode, didn't we, about all these drivers that have made moves now in Baku, and I think it has carried over to France, have now sort of cemented themselves in these teams. Vettel at Aston Martin, again, he got some good points this weekend. I think he came 9th in the end, Stroll 10th, and this wasn't a great weekend for Aston Martin, but they got the points that they needed. And I think Vettel now is challenging in that car the best he can, compared to, I'd say, Alonso, of a similar experience level, a much larger experience level, who in the Alpine isn't doing what I think you'd expect him to be doing. I think Alonso, I still forget sometimes in races that Alonso's even back in the sport.
Yeah. You'd expect him to be tickling the top 10 a bit more. His qualifying pace just hasn't really been there.
No.
And that's obviously hindered him in the race. Whereas, like Lance Stroll, did he go out in qualifying this?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he managed to battle back through the pack to get 10th.
I think the problem with Alonso, you can even compare it to his teammate Ocon. More times than not, I think, has outshone Alonso this season. Alonso's a 2-time world champion.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And we should say that that's probably the reason that Ocon has got the new contract that he's just signed.
Yeah.
Because he's been proving himself against the 2-time world champion in the exact same vehicle.
Absolutely. It's going to be interesting. I think Alonso, he's overhyped at this point, similar to Kimi Räikkönen.
That's what I keep saying.
They've long gone from their best days.
I'll die on this hill, but I can see the reason to bring them back. Like, I can see the reason to keep Kimi. Keep Kimi, sponsorship, money, cha-ching. The reason to have Alonso back in. Big name for your team, sponsorship, money, cha-ching. But at the end of the day, the race isn't won on the sponsorship deals you can get. The race is won on track.
Yeah. And, it is that bigger picture stuff. I think, to be fair, Alonso probably, when Ricciardo left, I think Alonso was a good shout for him to bring in. He had that big name and experience. He was a proven driver.
Well, it was a massive blow for them when Ricciardo left, because exactly. he was the guy that they were building the car around.
Yeah.
And if you haven't seen Drive to Survive on Netflix, that very much focuses on that in this last series.
Yeah, I think it wasn't ideal, and Alonso was the one they went for. He's going to be there for another. I think he's got at least a contract for next year as well. I was reading the other day.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. He's not impressed me so far. There's still room to go on that. But Vettel, I think he's done really well in that Aston Martin. You do feel like he's much happier there than he ever was at Ferrari, which is obviously a very positive thing. And Perez, primarily is the one that we need to look on, and what we've said.
I'd argue
he's been driver of the season so far for me. That's not in a title fight.
I'd also argue that Carlos Sainz had a really good bad race, if you will.
Yeah.
Because he did significantly better than Leclerc in what is the same car, realistically, both in the Ferraris. He looks like he's settling down in that Ferrari now. What's disappointing is the fact that Ferrari doesn't look like it's been nice to him.
So here we go then. So talking about Ferrari, talking about the midfield, let's go over to Mr. Keeble as our specialist in midfield ongoings. As a McLaren fan, you know what's going on outside the title fight.
I'd argue we're top three. But,
okay. Is there any special mentions you want to throw in that might have been missed by the average viewer in the race this week that happened in that midfield battle?
I mean, you've done well to put me on the spot here. I honestly, we've talked about it before, the fact that Aston Martin were able to come from nowhere to be able to get 2 points finishes. And also not really midfield, but back of the pack, Mr. Saturday himself, George Russell, getting 12th. If it was any other race where we would have had a couple of cars crash out, it would have been in the points.
Yeah.
Because it's not often that you get an F1 race where all 20 cars finish.
Yeah, that's another point you should say. It was no retirements, wasn't there, in this race? That is rare. But yeah, 12th place for Russell, that's very good. And he did actually come out afterwards. I don't know if you've seen the stuff that was posted on socials afterwards. He came out saying that he thinks that's the best race he's ever had for Williams.
Wow. I mean, it shows.
Yeah.
It shows. But it's really nice to see Williams developing the way that they should be.
Yeah.
They were very much the lowest of the low when Claire was running it. Obviously, we all know that Claire ran it because she's Claire Williams. She deserved to run her own team, essentially.
Yeah.
But now that they've kind of took a step back and sold the team, it's definitely shown that the investors that they've sold it to is very much invested in the team.
Yeah, I think I've been very impressed by what Darlington have done so far. Obviously, they've recently, I think we might have talked about this last week, I'm not sure if we did, replace Simon Roberts as the team principal.
Yeah, I don't think we talked about it on the podcast. I'm not very... I know... I'm going to sound like such an Uber here. So I obviously know what team principals do. They run the team.
Yeah.
What was he doing that wrong? What was Simon doing that wrong?
Wasn't anything wrong.
That he needed to be replaced after what was literally about 8 races?
He wasn't doing anything wrong. His position, so this is what sort of Ted was talking about in the notebook, which is obviously where we get all of our content from.
Yep.
He's basically, from what's being sounded, is he never did anything wrong. It was essentially as soon as Darlington took over, they were looking for someone to bring in to put into that position. And Simon Roberts was promoted to be the temporary team principal.
Right.
Then at the end of the season, I know Milo, it's very depressing. At the end of the season, he was then promoted to be the full team principal, not just the standing one.
Mm-hmm.
And then they brought in a lot of the VW rally team. So a lot of big people, the names are escaping me at the moment, but a lot of the three big players from that very successful VW rally team to come and race for them. And slowly now they've been taken. Jos Capito is the name I'm looking for. They're slowly now taken over, and now they are the team principal and the team in charge. That's just the structure I think that Darlington wants to go for, and unfortunately Simon Roberts doesn't fit into that structure. He's not doing anything wrong inherently, but that's why. Might have taken a little walk.
Yes, he had a little shake then during the story.
Are you interested in Williams? He's come around to say, "Oh, okay."
I think it's the fact that he said the W word and not Williams is what's just piqued his attention.
Oh, right.
I wouldn't do that again because he'll start barking and clawing at the door.
Okay. Right then. Let's go on to before we get on to this week's predictions, I've got something exciting I want to tell you about.
Okay.
For the first time I think in this podcast history, last week a prediction was right. We made a prediction last week as to how the race podium would finish, and it was right. You predicted it would be Perez to win, Hamilton second, and Norris third. So it wasn't you, I'm afraid. But I predicted we'd see Verstappen win, Hamilton second, and Perez third. I got it right. I correctly predicted the race podium.
Okay.
So I think that makes it Tom minus 24, Reese minus 25, and Ruth minus 25.
Hold on, how's Ruth on minus 25 when she's done significantly less podcasts than me recently?
She'd be on a better score than you if I didn't count all of them. Do you want her to be on like minus 16? Anyway, thank you for your applause. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, no, I'm just annoyed now.
Successfully get my prediction
We're not
right.
meant to do it. We're not meant to do it right. You know that the whole part of it is that we get it wrong.
Right then. So as we depart the shores of Le Castellet, we look onto this weekend and next weekend. It's a back-to-back-to-back weekend of racing, and you've got to love that.
I don't know how well you can see it, but we're going there.
It's there. It's Austria. Well, Austria is the weekend after. It's Styria first.
Oh, I should say.
Oh, I was going to say.
New part of the shows.
Oh.
We're going to do the Biggest Baby Award. Don't know if you can see that on the camera.
I think he's just thought this up on the spot.
I have. Biggest Baby Award goes for someone who was complaining a lot in the race. Okay?
Uh-huh.
I'm going to give it to Mick Schumacher this week.
Oh. Congratulations, Mick Schumacher, on this week's Biggest Baby Award.
Well done, Mick. We'll send it in the post.
Right, yes. Triple header. We've already had the first. We've got 2 races left. You got to love it, and I love when you have all this racing all in one go. We're off to Styria next. Reese, qualifying predictions in Styria. What are you thinking?
I am thinking that the Red Bull will do extremely well. And I'm also thinking that the McLarens will do really well as well.
Ooh, this is where Lando got his first podium, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it could happen.
It's tasting tasty, shall I say.
So give me your actual top 3 then, that qualifying.
I hate it when you make me do this. It's going to be Verstappen, Hamilton, Daniel Ricciardo.
He's done it again. I'll say last week it was Perez, Hamilton, Norris, and he's gone again. Red Bull, Mercedes, McLaren. Qualifying, I think. Verstappen.
No, Mazepin. Oh, Mazepin's going to win it.
Mazepin's going to win it. Verstappen on pole. I think he's going to do it again. He got pole in France. No, I didn't put him on. I put him for second last week, and he got pole. So I think he's going to do pole again this week, which probably means he won't. We'll have Hamilton second, and I think we'll have Perez third.
Okay.
Yes. What's your race prediction then, Mr. Keeble?
McLaren 1-2, Mercedes third.
No, I think you're having us for a ride here now.
I think it's going to finish Perez first, Max second, Valtteri Bottas third. Lewis Hamilton is going to have some kind of car failure that will make him retire from the race.
So this was last week. Your prediction was that it would be Hamilton would be in there second, Perez would win it, and Norris would be third, and Verstappen would have a major issue.
Yeah.
This week you flipped on its head. You said it'll be Perez first, Verstappen second, and Bottas third, and Hamilton's gonna have a major issue. So, Big Baby Award, I think, now goes to Race for his original ideas.
I mean, hey, you asked me what I'm predicting, and I'm going to predict a riot.
So I'm going to say it will be.
You're not kicked my dog.
I kicked my dog. I'm sorry, man. I think it's going to be Hamilton win. I think it's going to be Verstappen second, and I think it's going to be Perez third. That's my prediction for next week.
Are you sick of the podcast now, Milo? Should we end it?
Poor Milo.
Should we end the podcast
Poor
now?
Milo. I'm actually going to quickly, before we do finish, just reference the fact we're both wearing England shirts.
It's because it's coming home.
It's coming home, lads. If you're watching on the video, it's coming home.
Gerard! He's going to come out of retirement and bang one in the final.
That won't happen.
Gerard!
So, there you go. Well, there we go. What a lovely podcast. What a lovely chat. Thank you very much to everyone for listening.
Bye, Milo. Milo's literally just opened the door.
Milo's left. He's off.
He's had enough.
I hope you've enjoyed us being back in person once again. It just adds that nice little bit
Is
of
this
chemistry.
becoming a regular thing now?
Maybe.
Are you going to stay in person?
Hopefully. Can I move in?
Yeah.
Spare bed?
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
Perfect. There we go. I've got a new house. So that's really fun.
House tour coming soon.
Yeah, subscribe. 100k subs with the house tour. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully we'll enjoy the next race, and you'll enjoy us listening to us review it.
I'd argue for the listeners, while a tap dancer comes back with his toy, I'd argue for the listeners, you don't need to watch the race. Just listen to us. Yeah. So,
that's the new slogan of the Rearview Podcast. Anyway, without further ado, I have been Tom.
I've been Reese.
And we'll see you next time. Bye bye.
Au revoir.
Not yet. Music's a bit foamy now.